I would like to welcome you to the Financing Innovation Panel of the first International ESCO Symposium. My name is Svetlana Adamek, and I'm really very much excited to participate in this event and to have been given the opportunity to moderate today's discussion. I'm in the field of ESCO energy performance contracts for more than 2 decades, participating in numerous projects, either as an ESCO or as advisor for development agencies to help governments facilitating the use of energy performance contracts in various countries. And currently I'm working on the establishing and piloting of a super ESCO program in Moldova. Today we have a great opportunity to come together and exchange experiences and ideas how to advance the ESCO concept in a higher and more sustainable level. Together with our panelists, which I will introduce shortly, we are going to address challenges on the market, challenges that ESCOs face when securing financing. And we will discuss and hear the advices of our panelists about how to de-risk, what de-risking mechanisms are available on the market, smart way to capitalize the ESCO projects, and the blended financing in making such projects even more viable. Our panelists, all of them, are senior and very experienced in the ESCO industry in developing innovative financing mechanism, and they dedicated their professional careers in advancing energy efficiency and I will start to present the internationally recognized senior, very experienced experts and pioneers in developing in energy efficiency for sure, and demand-side management, and in developing ESCO and super ESCOs frameworks, Mr. Dilip Limaye. So now I need my short notice, who is President and CEO of SRC Global, and Mr. Pierre Langlois, the President of Econolair and co-chair of the steering committee of the Global ESCO Network. Top-tier investment bankers and senior investment advisors. To my left, Mr. Csaba Decicchi, Chairman and Senior Managing Partner of EnerSafe. Mr. Mehdi Benjelloun, I hope I pronounce it correct, the family name, which is the Director of the African Energy Efficiency Fund, the first investment fund in Morocco dedicated to energy efficiency, and Mrs. Louisa Troit, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Solus Capital, a specialized investment advisory firm. And last but not least, a senior professional from an actual ESCO company, Mr. Benjamin Brouet, who is Director of Energy Performance Services at Siemens. Before we start our discussion, I would like to be on the safe page to define or to explain what we mean when we say ESCO market or super ESCO market, because I got today a few questions, what is the difference, how both concepts differ. by ESCO energy service company. We understand energy service provider who delivers complex energy efficiency projects, usually implemented through energy performance contracts. But they are not only contractors, they also offer a performance or performance guarantee to their clients, usually financing the projects, taking the technical risks and sometimes the financial risks. They are focusing on installing energy saving and energy generating measures, as well as optimizing the operation and maintenance of the system in buildings. On the other hand, we have the Super ESCO. The Super ESCO is a specialized organization which is usually established and funded by the government to facilitate and implement energy retrofit programs. I said usually because lately, the last 3 years, we have examples already for privately owned Super ESCOs. They play, Super ESCOs play important role. They are trying to reduce the energy demand and usually are part of the demand side management strategy directly linked to the savings objectives of the strategy. It is important to stress and to underline that the Super ESCO does not compete with the ESCOs. Rather, they create and enable the market for the private ESCOs, overcoming easier existing barriers on the market. What they do, they prepare bankable project pipelines, they leverage on commercial financing, they ensure access to financing, and ensure also the quality of the development and implementation of the energy efficiency projects. So, at the beginning, we said how to bring the financial sector finally to invest in these projects, to be able or to make us able to answer this question. We should put ourselves in the shoes of a bank, of a financial institution. What are really the challenges or the barriers why they are not feeling attracted to invest in such projects? I mentioned that we have in our panel a representative of ESCO, and I would like to ask Mr. Bruet to share with us, based on his experience, what are the challenges he faces when securing financing for energy performance contract.
Hello, everyone. So I took a few notes because my experience is primarily with Europe, but I also asked my Siemens colleagues in the US and in Middle East, especially Saudi Arabia, for some comments on this topic. And so here would be my answer to your question, Svetlana. So in Saudi Arabia, most of the current market Siemens addresses is linked to Tarshid, the Super ESCO. And clearly they're one of the teams that has a market which seems most, let's say, easy to forecast. It gives them vision, it gives them a base for the business, and it really allows them to develop and progress. And this is something really helping the business, but also clearly the improvement of the energy efficiency and of the buildings out there. In the US, they are actually going through a phase following the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, after the pandemic, where they've seen a massive influx of grants, subsidies, especially for the public entities, the municipalities, and so this is a good thing. Obviously, this is really helping finance many projects that before that were completely blocked. But the issue that is happening right now is, at least from the Siemens perspective, the business focus has really shifted toward the public, and the private sector has been a bit deserted. I'm being quite transparent, because those grants, they provide such an amount of money. The teams are not of infinite sizes, so they go where the business is the simplest, right? So all those grants, they've accelerated the development times. They've made the projects a lot more easy to forecast, a lot more certain. And so then the issue is that because this flow of money is going through the public sector, then the traditional approach from the private sector, which is based on IRR, net present value, and they're expecting, at least from a financing point of view, much better returns of investment. Well, right now it's not really being addressed. So, one thing can lead to some consequences on another side of the sector. And then in Europe, I would say it's a bit more contrasted. In a nutshell, I would say it started more with the public, maybe 10, 15 years ago, and now the shift is more toward the private clients and also private financing. Issues we have are still linked to the profitability of such investments for the financing world, which are expecting quite high returns of investment, and right now price of energy is actually quite low, so even the payback times are going through the roof. And also our clients, what they really want now is fully decarbonize their sites. And it means huge investments, and it also means taking CO2, GHG emissions to zero. And that requires a lot of investment, and obviously, the small paybacks, they allow you to maybe reach 10, 15% of reduction, but if you want to go to 100, we see payback only based on the energy prices that are beyond 20 years or even 50 years. And that is just not compatible with the expectations of the financial world. So obviously there are subsidies, white certificates, for instance, but the devil is in the details, I guess. There are certain ways of financing that are actually not really compatible with subsidies provided by such schemes. I give you an example. Managed service agreements, where as Siemens, as the ESCO, we are able to be the ones who own the assets that are being installed, are not really compatible with white certificates, because you're supposed to essentially transfer those assets before the client can actually get the white certificates. And then it's a disaster, because those clients are really looking for an off-balance way of conducting the decarbonization, and all of a sudden they would have to give up sometimes very significant subsidies. Right. I guess also more generally speaking, financial counterparts are looking for simpler projects, PV farms, things like that, where it's quite easy to understand the risk, operational risk, financial risk. When we come with full decarbonization of a site, or several sites, it's a lot more complex than that, right? It involves many, many different aspects: lighting, the structure of the building, heat pumps. If you go into the industry, it's even more complex and more risky. And then what we see is the financial world is seeing too much complexity and often refraining from investing. And I will stop here.
Thank you, Benjamin. As I mentioned, I started as an ESCO, and I can remember many negotiations with banks and financial institutions where, as said, the duration of the contract, the payback period, collaterals requirements towards the ESCO companies, or just the complexity of the contract. The financial institutions do not have the expertise to properly evaluate the risk of such contracts, and which to hire to do the due diligences, which leads to even higher transaction costs for the bank, as well as the ticket size. The ESCO company comes and, okay, I would like to finance 500,000, but this is too small to cover this transaction cost, upfront cost of the bank. Interesting is, Mr. Limaye, would you add something from the perspective of a super ESCO, what challenges they face when organizing the financing?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity of being here and discussing some of the challenges and some of the possible solutions that I've been able to do in my work with many international organizations, particularly the World Bank. We have not been focusing on the big countries like the US, where, as Timothy pointed out this morning, there is no financing issue. Financing is easily available to ESCOs, and they can do all kinds of projects. And some of the European countries, there are many grants and other availability of financing. But as we go into many other countries, most of whom have made NDC commitments and have established targets for their public sector to meet some of these goals, their challenges are very great because there are so many. We heard a lot about the regulatory issues this morning, but we didn't hear some of the important ones that many developing countries face. For example, if you're a public institution and you're budget-based and you have somebody make an investment to save energy and therefore energy costs, your budget next year gets reduced because next year's budget is based on this year's costs. So as your costs go down, your budget goes down. So there's no way for them to pay the investor or use funds to do additional projects. There are also procurement regulations, but I'm sure ESCOs in this audience will appreciate, is that many procurement regulations require low bidder. They pick the lowest cost. Well, the lowest cost is not necessarily the best one to pick. What you want to pick is the best value. But current regulations, and we have tried to change these procurement regulations in some countries. We have been successful in a couple of countries where we have established that procurement should be done on best net present value rather than least cost. And that can help ESCOs. But the problem still remains, as has already been pointed out, about the ESCO's ability to get financing. Banks, he mentioned ticket size, he mentioned the issues with not understanding the ESCO models, the business models, not having enough collateral from the customer, particularly if you're talking about public sector. They do not have any collateral they can offer to the bank. So bank says, I'm taking a big risk here. How can I finance this project? So these projects, and I could go on, these problems with, in particularly the public sector in developing countries for a long time, right, which we don't have today. What therefore we have tried to do is to create this concept of a super ESCO. And the reason for the super ESCO is that the private ESCOs in many markets are underfinanced, unlike Siemens, for example, which are okay. But so, some of the smaller ESCOs are underfinanced. They don't have the capital base to attract bank financing because they can't provide collateral. Their clients in the public sector can't provide collateral. So there's a big set of barriers here that need to be overcome. What is the concept of a super ESCO and how can it function? Well, a super ESCO essentially is a government agency that facilitates contracting with public organizations. This is one of the challenges that ESCOs have. The contracting procedures between ESCO and a public agency are very complicated, sometimes impossible. The setup of a super ESCO as a government entity enables them to sign contracts with what I call parent agencies. So they can sign the contract with the Ministry of Health to do all the hospitals, or the Ministry of Education to do all the schools, or the Ministry of Public Administration to do buildings. And that then provides a mechanism for them to do the projects, including performance contracting approaches. The main point is that how does this help ESCOs? Well, the way it helps ESCOs is that the super ESCO is not only supposed to contract and perform these projects, but they're supposed to engage the private ESCOs as the implementing agents. So the energy audits, the equipment procurement, and all the other functions that go into developing and installing a project are generally subcontracted by the super ESCO to the private ESCOs.
Dilip, I think we are talking already about how to improve the situation,
now I'll talk
and the
about-
super ESCO as a mechanism.
Yeah, so now, how does the super ESCO get the financing? That's the question.
The challenges a super ESCO face
So,
when attracting.
so in some of the super ESCOs, they have been funded by the government, and they've been capitalized sufficiently so that they have the financing available. But that is not always the case. In the case of the Dubai, the Etihad Super ESCO, they had something called a National Energy Fund that provided the financing. It's the same thing if a super ESCO tries to approach a bank, because again, the question comes up is, what is your background, what is your experience, what have you done so far? And banks are therefore going to wait and see if this model is going to work and if it's going to create the approach that will make it successful. There is still this issue of risk perception. Who takes the risk? The super ESCO may be able to take some of the risk, may be able to come up with some guarantee funds. In the European Union, we have seen a lot of guarantee funds that reduce that risk. So the super ESCO's challenges are developing a structure that can utilize some of the government financing, leverage, if possible, external financing, and then essentially engage with the agencies to create the mechanisms that will allow them to engage the ESCOs and provide ESCOs the financial support to get the projects to work. That is the concept, and I think the recently established super ESCOs in Saudi Arabia, in Abu Dhabi and Dubai show this very clearly.
Thank you very much, Dilip. It will be interesting to hear, is there any difference with the privately owned super ESCO when they try to attract investments to place on the market? So Pierre and Mehdi.
Well, I can start, and I would say good news for the industry that we currently have $1 billion under management as a super ESCO in the private sector. No government funding except some investment from the French government and the French super ESCO that we have, and the Canadian government in the Canadian ESCO super ESCO that we have. But we're able to mobilize quite a lot of money under the super ESCO scheme, only dedicated to private sector. So when we talk about super ESCO, and I agree with Dilip, most of super ESCOs in the past have been done for public sector, and their added value goes quite a lot on procurement, so being able to bring the projects to life. In our case, there's nothing about procurement, it's private sector, and we work with most of the biggest ESCOs in the world, Siemens being one of our biggest contractor in Canada right now, based on a project we do. But we have all the others, the Johnson Controls, Siemens, Dalkia, and all that. They all work with us because I think the first basis, the difference between an ESCO and a super ESCO, and coming back to financing, and I think Dilip will agree on me on that because we work many projects together. The first statement is an ESCO is not a bank. And many countries we go to, they all believe, oh, an ESCO comes in, so we will finance everything, that the banks cannot. That's not the case. And ESCO brings a lot of added value on the technical side, on the guarantee side, on the structuring side, and the design side, and they eliminate a lot of the barriers. One that they have a lot of struggles to deal with is the financing. We work in China quite a lot, biggest market on earth. I think we supported the creation of 5,000 ESCOs in China. Most of them came to us and they said, well, I have this chain of shops. They have 1,000 shops to do. I'll invest $1 million and I'll wait for the $1 million to come back to do the second one. Well, for 1,000 shops, they're probably in for 1,000 years. So that won't work. So I think the reality is that there's money out there. There's money, and that money is very interesting to come to the energy efficiency, climate change issues. The challenge that they have, and I think it's been mentioned in most of the documents you have in front of you, is the challenge of the size of the transaction. So Super ESCO brings that added value. It pulls projects together. So our tickets, when I say I have $1 billion under management, anyone who came to us at a minimum ticket of $30 million. Below that, they would not commit. So we bundle all these $30 million, $100 million, and bundle them into $1 billion. Now, the real challenge in our case is not attracting financing. It's attracting clients. You'll say, how come? You have the money, you have the ESCOs, you have Siemens, you have Johnson Control, you have Dalkia, you have everybody. Well, the real issue that we don't talk quite a lot about is the reality of the client. So there's 3 poles into this. There's a client, there's the ESCOs, being created, existing, and there's the money. I think the money's coming in. That's not the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge in the private sector is the reality of the clients. Most of them don't invest in projects of more than 2 years payback. That's the reality. So when we start talking about paybacks and they want to do 2 years payback, not able to mobilize enough funding to do the project because it's too small. So we work with 15 years terms. Well, great for us as far as a super ESCO, pretty bad for clients because they cannot see in front of them for 15 years. They have a difficulty to see in front of them for 15 months. But if we want to decarbonize them and have an energy transition, we have to look down. So 15 years is a challenge. The other one is accounting. And I think at some point, if we have a session on accounting, I would be very, very happy. We talk a lot about off-balance sheet. Well, we have to recognize that our activity as ESCOs is at a very deep challenge from the accounting because we're competing with energy access. So when you buy energy, that has no impact on your balance sheet. You just pay every year, it's an OPEX. Whenever you do...
There is one impact on the balance sheet, and this is depreciation.
Exactly. So, and you depreciate, and it's essentially an operational cost. When you invest in a project, whoever tells you that it can be off balance sheet doesn't know accounting. Because as of today, accountants pulled the plug. They made sure that it will not happen. It may happen once in a while if an accountant is nice enough to let it go, but technically IFRS and any norms, European norms, North American norms, will prevent you to do an off-balance sheet. And that creates the main issue because if you want to do a deep retrofit, 15 years, big project, it becomes a debt. However you structure it, it becomes a debt. And industries don't want to have debt. The reason they don't want to have debt is they're not able to leverage their money to actually do the core business that they have. So we have to find a way. So we structured it in a way with our investors that we work on a subordinated debt kind of approach, below the bank ranking. In the sense that it's not off balance sheet, because I don't think it's possible, and someone prove me wrong, I would be very, very happy. But if it's not, we structured it in a way that the banks don't see it. So you achieve exactly the same goal. The last challenge that we have is positive cash flow. Enterprises that even are doing very well are essentially very, very keen of having positive cash flow. So you have to find a way to structure it through positive cash flow. Having done all that, you address a little bit of the client needs, still struggling. But as far as financing, we have very low-cost capital from pension funds, from banks, from ADEME in France, from the government of Canada. It's not really the cost of money. Even we're very attractive. We're below 7% as expected return on investment. But I would say that even if I was 11% or 12%, it would not change quite a lot of things because that's not the issue. We're essentially able, and I think that's the last point, to bring to the market a solution that they can do energy efficiency at the same time as they do anything else. We cannot find a way, or it's very difficult for our industry, to try to convince people to do energy efficiency instead of something else. Because a hotel will always want to develop its website more than to change its chiller. That's its NDA. That will not change. So we have to structure a way, and I think financing is getting there. Last thing about financing, though. Even though we have achieved that great result, I think financing is still way beyond what we want. Because they want to do that with us at one condition, that we work with clients that are investment grade. Because obviously the risk that we're taking is the client over a long period of time. When we came to Europe and we came to France, we were very, very surprised to hear that maybe 1 out of 20 enterprises are investment grade because of COVID, because of whatever situation. So I think if there's a role of government to play in financing, it would not be to bring the money because the money is there. It's to bring the guarantees. Because the client is very difficult as a collateral because they're not creditworthy. So I can imagine if you work in Ghana or you work in Kenya or you work in Vietnam, and you try to work with these organizations and finance them on the long-term basis, how difficult it will be to find them, to find the organization that would be creditworthiness. And that's where there's still a gap between the financing, the money is out there, and bringing it to our model, to your model, where we can finance these energy efficiency projects more broadly than just the best enterprises possible.
Thank you, Pierre. As I mentioned, Mehdi is the director of the African Energy Efficiency Fund, which is a privately owned super ESCO in Africa. Is the situation different from what we just heard from Pierre?
Thank you very much, Svetlana. If I may, I will have a short presentation about what we are doing in Morocco. The Super ESCO we are managing with Econolair and my friend Pierre. You have said that Super ESCO as mainly public. This is the great counter example. That's what we are doing today in Morocco. So our Super ESCO is addressed to tertiary and industrial customers to reduce CO2 emission and to optimize energy consumption. Just a presentation of the sponsor. I think you know very well Econolair, the world leader in energy efficiency consulting. But we are, as management company of the Fonds Africain d'Efficacité Énergétique, we are a branch of the Tijari Wafa Bank, which is the biggest bank in Morocco and fifth in Africa, with more than 42 billion balance sheet, euro balance sheet. So this is, I think, it's the slide the most important, as we have said before, and as Pierre said, all is about risk allocation and de-risking project. We have worked in such a fund to allocate the risk to the best party who can take it. So here we are the management company. The fund is managed by Econolair and Tijari Capital Management. We are managing the Fonds Africain d'Efficacité Énergétique, and today for the first closing we will have 20 million euro for this fund, and we have shareholders that trust us with this fund. What we are mainly doing, and it's a best example of how Super ESCO works, is that we are doing performance contract with our customers. What we are saying, we take care of everything. We identify the project, we make the installation, and we share the savings. No technical risk for the customer, no financial risk for the customer. So that's the point here, is that we are obliged to work with investment grade clients because we are taking this financial risk. Our ADN is to invest in the medium and long term, and we are doing it, so we are doing it with the right customers. In the other side, we are working with ESCOs. We have a performance contract with ESCOs that guarantee the work. So they are doing the work, they are getting paid, and they are giving us the guarantee on the savings. So all the technical risks is with the ESCO, and the ESCO is the best part to take it. So we are working on the ESCOs, and we need ESCOs. Here, what we are trying to do also, and we have standard performance contract with the ESCOs and with the customers. The main objective with this standardization is to have some depth after that in the SPVs, because even for the due diligence of the banks, it's easier when we have a standard contract. They just need to see it once and not to go project by project, which will be very difficult. So by this scheme, we are trying to de-risking the energy efficiency project.
Mehdi, you're jumping in my de-risking.
Thank you.
Maybe when we come to this, you can share how do you do this.
Okay, thank you. So that's how it works. We are facing a lot of challenges. As I said today, we have some ESCOs with that, but we are creating the market, because before that, the customers were just working with some companies, depending photovoltaic, biomass, very different companies. The main challenge is to create the ESCO markets and to take with us some ESCOs, and also to have some pedagogy with our clients, because it's quite a new scheme. So that's what I wanted to show in the private super ESCO that we are doing with Econolair. Just maybe it's our objective. It's more than 50 million euro in the next 2 years.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now I would like to ask Luisa, which works directly with ESCOs, what challenges do they face when securing financing?
Yeah, thanks, Svetlana. So just to give a bit of an overview about what we're doing at Solus Capital, we're an energy efficiency financing company, and our main product is our Solus Sustainable Energy Fund, which basically it provides financing from, so the investors in the fund, it's all large institutions. It's the European Investment Bank and MEAG, which is Munich Re's asset management arm. We do have a lot of contact also with these institutions, and the concept is that we bridge this gap between. Thank you. Oh, okay. Thank you. That we bridge the gap between these big institutional investors who, as other people have mentioned, they're really interested in investing in sustainable projects. They're interested in energy efficiency, but they don't have the expertise to kind of be involved in it. So it's bridging the gap between them and then between the ESCOs and the ESCOs customers who then really actually need the financing. And yeah, I mean, in terms of what the challenges are for the ESCOs, I think Pierre covered it pretty well. Like, one of the main issues, at least in Europe, and our fund is focused in the Eurozone, so that's where my experience lies, but is around creditworthiness. A lot of the projects, the end customers, a lot of them have, they're SMEs, they have lower credit rating, and that's where exactly, having a first loss guarantee. I'm not going to move on to the next topic too soon, but that's where that can really help attract financing. So yeah, that would be one. Another is the typical project size is quite small. So for investors, some of the projects can be 50,000 for if you've got like a heat pump or something, and particularly on residential projects. So it's how you can bundle those projects together into something that's then interesting for an investment. Exactly, yeah, to bundle them into portfolios. So that's the areas where they tend to have challenges. And I think one of the other issues is it's less well known. Like a few people have mentioned this morning already, the supply side, if you've got like solar farms, wind farms, that stuff, it's all, banks are used to it. They now understand it and they know about it and they know what they're doing, but you come to them with energy efficiency and it's many different technologies.
But is it about the image? Is the supply side having better image?
I think that's part of it. I think part of it is, it's pretty cool if you have like, oh yes, we've got this huge, the biggest solar farm in Europe or whatever. I think that is part of it. The other part is with the size of it and the complexity. It's often to really understand the technology, and because it is so diversified, like so many different ESCOs do different things. I think Dilip was mentioning earlier that you have one ESCO and it's maybe doing 5 different things, right? Like we have one client that we work with and they're doing it's all kind of industrial dairy farming, and they have cooling, they have lighting, all of these different things, and it's then how you manage the different technologies as well.
So we had the challenges with access to finance. We had the challenges with availability of finance, with the limited pool dedicated to energy efficiency, and then the banks comparing, okay, am I investing in this, or in this. We have the complexity of the energy performance contract, the long payback period, the high perceived risks. I will turn to our investment banker and ask him to summarize why actually the capital markets are not over happy to jump in and finance energy efficiency first.
Thank you for this. And I'm sorry, we are going to be going for drinks at midnight, so, because the answer is so long. Now, if I'm an investment banker, I don't know what a loan looks like. So if all of you are wondering what investment bankers are and regular bankers are, regular bankers, you've got the collateral, and they will lend you against it, subject of you being able to repay. Investment bankers are there and are looking at creating product, hopefully big, because investment bankers don't like to work, and the bigger products have got an attractivity to investors. One of our core problems, and Carlos was mentioning it earlier, he's seeing projects in ESCOs of 1 million. You were speaking about 50,000, the heat pump. Try to go anywhere and excite anybody to open his wallet for a 1 million transaction, a $50,000 transaction. I mean, I've got a business in the UK which changes boilers. Guess what? One boiler is £3,500. Where do I go to? I went to my own bank, which is in my wallet, and paid for the change of boilers. Was there credit risk? Zero. People repay well. Now, I've heard a lot of interesting aspects, and Luisa, your company is just brilliant. Not only are the partners a very integrated team, but they have come up with a very, very good business model, which actually starts getting to size. So you're deploying very, very cleverly your funds with reputable people, and with that, they have, I think, in 2 years spent your money?
We're getting there on the framework level, yeah.
Yeah. So they are having a very, very good product. Now, I spoke recently to an old friend of mine, the head of the largest Central European bank, the former head. And he said to me, you know how much money there is lying around in the savings account across the Eurozone? 14 trillion. The zero starts there and ends over there. This is money which is lying there at virtually zero. I finished this. Then I've got a son who used to work with your managing partners, making good money. Every now and then he comes up and starts a sentence with papi, which means that he needs something. Papi, I would like to put some money into a green bond. Where can I buy some? Now, and that's where the investment banker comes in. There is no product out there which qualifies for either the small retail investor or the larger pension funds, which basically are saying, so the small investor says, give me 10,000, which then you can settle by a Euroclear, which is probably tradable, hopefully tradable. That applies to the large investors as well. But those guys are saying, I need a minimum ticket size of 5 to 10 million. I can't take more than 5% of an issue. And please give me a listing. So now we are talking of 250 million. I fully agree with Pierre that money is not a problem. We are just not going there with the right product. So that is the biggest gap we see. Where I disagree with Pierre, and I don't really...
Maybe.
No, I fundamentally disagree on his view on IFRS because it's wrong. We have got a KPMG opinion, we've got a Pricewaterhouse opinion, we've got a Grant Thornton opinion, which actually the EU paid for, and I was working with BNP Paribas on making an off-balance sheet contract, which is key for the industry. It blows their balance sheet apart if you don't bring something off balance sheet. And that's one issue which thankfully the EU has solved. So large companies and the whole real estate sector need to make their balance sheets and all the funds under IFRS. You are under IFRS. So if you don't comply with IFRS 16, which is just dealing with leasing versus off-balance sheet, then you've got a problem in selling your product. So what we see is the combination of super ESCO, of what Louisa's fund is doing, and the regular deleveraging, which then creates investment bankable products which we can sell to institutions who've got an enormous demand. I'm going to tell you a short story. It's not fun. It's actually funny, but it's not funny. I've got a very, very good friend of mine who's got a son, 40 years old, runs 3 billion out of Brussels in debt market products. Every 3-4 months, fund managers in Brussels wander off and have a good lunch. The boss comes back and says to his employee, "Have you heard about taxonomy?" "Yes, boss, I've heard about taxonomy." "Have you heard about ESG?" "Ah oui, j'ai entendu." Phew. They were all talking about that. How could I miss it? But anyhow, they're speaking about asset allocation. They all put between 5 to 15% into that. Why don't we put 10% of our fund into this? The poor guy hasn't got the product to buy because he is back to the 250 million issue. And this is, I think, where we all need to work closer together. I heard something which is called standardization. That's key. The due diligence costs blow any securitization transactions apart if there is not one contract. You can go to VW and want to have your car in pink with yellow stripes on it. For money, VW will produce it. But if you tell VW Finance you don't like the paragraph 27/3 on page 2, he's going to tell you, finito la musica. So we need to have contracts which are standardized, and we actually should look a little bit, what has the car industry done? Because we are back to the 50,000 euros. How could the car industry become one of the biggest securitization producers on the market by standardization, by credit checks, and by creating capital market products which then sit in the various pockets? Because what many people forget is that the capital market is not one big sack. These are little boxes of people. For a certain amount of money, investors can put money into Louisa's fund. But they need to, and I think that that's what many people are forgetting, they need to support it with capital. So anything which is in private equity box is having a different capital requirement than those people who are having tradable instruments. And these are all elements which we need to bring together. A certain moment where one needs to deleverage, because there is a balance sheet everywhere. Every ESCO is having a balance sheet. At some moment, he's running out of steam. And then he needs to create a new product which, if you're having 20-year cash flows, sit perfectly well with pension funds, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for stable income at 3.5% for 20 years. And there you've got the long pockets. So we need to produce, there's a wonderful expression in English, horses for courses. There's no point in trying to look for a 3.5% product, which is 1 year or 2 year tenor. These are different products with different yield expectations, and we need to produce the yield according to the tenor which is out there. I hope that gave you a little bit of a...
Thank you, Chava. And we basically started our discussion on the risking mechanism, standardization of contracts being one of them. Dilip, how a super ESCO approach and concept addresses these challenges, how a super ESCO reduces the high perceived risks or the other challenges ESCO are facing?
Well, in terms of some of the challenges we already heard, one thing that Super ESCO does is aggregation. They can do 50 schools or 20 hospitals in one project. That increases the ticket size, which makes it more, that you can create a product for that. So that's one way to do it. The other thing, of course, is that they have done the de-risking of the technical side, which is already mentioned earlier, about having the individual ESCOs that they're subcontracting with take care of the risks on that side. So the ESCOs are not taking the financing risks, they're taking the technical risks. And the Super ESCO is aggregating projects to create products that could then be financed, not by the government, but by the private banks and financial institutions.
But also the aggregation of projects is also leading to diversifying of the performance risk between the single projects within this.
Overall, yes, it is. So that's what they're doing. And while most of the Super ESCOs so far have been financed by the government, I think the ultimate objective is that these Super ESCOs can actually access non-government financing. Once they demonstrate the model, once they do the aggregation, once they develop, again, they have to develop products. So they will develop both technical products and then go to the banks and financial institutions with the financial products. And that is one way for them to put together a portfolio that can then be extended and be sustained.
I would like to add that the Super ESCO also provides technical assistance or build bankable project pipeline, which is ready to be implemented. What is also, I think Pierre will agree with me, is to ensure a high quality of the preparation of the project to be tendered in the public sector, not in the private, but in the public sector, because this is one of the highest risks when I analyzed the ESCO market last year in Poland, that the projects are with very different level of quality prepared.
You're totally right. In the public sector, the challenges, and we've been advising thousands of projects in Canada and around the world on the public sector, the challenge is that each of these institutions that we work with are doing one project in their lifetime. So it's always very, very challenging. As Super ESCO, we designed and we supported the Dubai Super ESCO related to the public sector. The biggest added value to the public sector is that really the money. Because technically, government could finance it if they want it. I'm not saying it's the best way to do that. I'm saying very often they do that. The challenge is to standardize it, and the success we had in Dubai was essentially that when we started up, there was 0 ESCO operating, and we ended up 5 years later where there's probably 20 ESCOs operating, having a sustainable market in front of them, which is standardized. Every time there's a bid, it's the same bid. Every time there's a contract, there's the same contract. Every time there's measurement verification, it's the same way of doing that, simplifying the market quite a lot. So you're totally right. On the public sector side, the biggest added value is necessarily the standardizing and bringing the market together. On the private sector, and I like what my colleague just said about being wrong about it, I think that's the purpose of these kind of events, is we challenge each other about it. Well, on our side, we work with the Big Four, both in France and both in Canada. We implemented 75 projects with IBM, with airports, with private sector organizations, with colleges and everything. We work with the Big Four. Not one of them passed the test of being of balance sheet. But we do something very, very rare. We transfer the asset day one. So imagine that we're transferring the asset to the end user. We're financing it without any collateral. No guarantee whatsoever on the collateral. We ask nothing, and our payment is conditional. No one accounting firm accepted it to be off balance sheet. And they all confirmed by writing to the investors, BNP Paribas, the government of Canada, the government of France, that it's impossible today under it to structure it. Now, is it a good thing? No, because I totally agree with you that we need it, because we're competing with energy supply that is off balance sheet. So we need it. If there was a way to do that, and if you find a way, I would be buying it tomorrow morning. But I think that's the purpose of when I said we need an half day talking about it, because it's complex. Many of us are not accountant. Most of us are not accountant. And we're challenged with these things. So on the financing side, we're looking at it, and we fully agree. Money is out there. The challenge is to bring it to the end user where they accept it. And even though the ESCO brings a lot of added value, and your projects and all of our projects are good because we bring all these other added value. The ESCO guarantee, the capacity to structure it, the capacity building, the independence on measurement and verification. All of that is great, but the missing link is, are we able to bring that money to end user where they actually say, I can use it without compromising my other activities? And I think in the next year, we'll have all the big four, which would be great, and having the practitioners, and if we can unlock this, and maybe you can, and maybe I cannot, but that would be a great thing. And that's what this business of Super ESCO is essentially that. It's not super, and I want to say that again. We call it super, the leap, and everybody, not because it's better. It will look like, it's Super ESCO, so we're way better than the other. It's not better, it's just a different thing. It brings an added value that most ESCOs do not want to bring. So we work with...
That's why I call it superhero.
So we work with Siemens, Johnson Control, Honeywell. They provide financing once in a while, but fundamentally, that's not their business. Their business is being great at the technical issues, guaranteeing the savings, implementing. That's what they do best. If we can get out the financing out of their hands and within a vehicle that we call Super ESCO, could be something else, bringing those $1 trillion into the market, then we can accomplish something. I think we're near. And I think in many countries, it's starting to happen, which is a good thing. But it's still very complex because it addresses taxes, accounting, legal, contracts, and all that, which all of us probably are not that good at because we're not lawyers, accountants, and all that. But that's fundamentally the issues. This is where the problem lies. Not so much in the money, which is a good thing because 5 years ago, we would have said, well, where do we find the money? Now, Atijari Wafa Bank is a good example. Well, it's a bank. They're willing to commit 20 million, probably 50 million. Well, your financing organization, they're all willing to bring money. Ours are. So money is there. How to structure it to bring it to the market? Well, next year we'll have a two-day event, talking about all that, because that's really the challenging part, and it's great to have different views on all that.
There is a short request for reply.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. The way you described it, it's on balance sheet. What we have created, the contract is in the public domain. It's on the EU website. We went as a service because that was the only way how we could do this. And actually, asset is not being transferred. And we had, for this contract, 13 billion of investment capital, some out of Paris, a lot out of Zurich, sitting there and giving us advice. And my friends at BNP from Brussels and we were taking notes. And we were taking notes from the industry, and we were taking notes from the end clients. And then we all sat there and went to the most boring people in the world, to the accountants, and said, so what can we do with this? And then they gave us, if you do this, and if you do that, and then you do this. And that's how we came up with this off-balance sheet as a service contract, where there's an SPV, which owns the asset and sells the output. And the very important thing is, which actually made it jump through all the hoops, is that the actual owner of the equipment, so let's call it Siemens, comes up with a great cooling machine. So we were selling the cooling machine, and 6 weeks later, the Siemens engineer comes up with a newer idea. But as Siemens SPV is the owner of the equipment, he can go there, put the new gizmo into it, which then increases the energy performance by a further 10%, and it's this ownership of the asset and your ability to deal with it and to manage it and only selling an output, which made it for the accountants that it's off balance sheet.
I would like also to add that it's very similar when you have the legal ownership and the economic ownership. Now, currently, as I mentioned, we are working in Moldova on establishing a Super ESCO program. So we understood that there is no term of economic ownership. The party that is carrying the risks throughout the whole duration of the contract. So now we have the aggregation, which will give us the ticket size that the investors like so much. It will diversify the technical, the performance risk, the technical risks for the ESCO. We have the standardization in baseline energy consumption methodology, that everybody knows how this is calculated, how it will be normalized, adjusted, calibrated, etc. We have the M&V, the measurement and verification methodology. We have standardization in the contract, as simple as possible. We have, what else? What other risk-sharing or risk-sharing mechanism could you share with us?
Sure. I think that's working, yes. Yeah, so basically, the way, and again, like as a European-based fund, like our experience is within Europe, and I would say that there's 3 different levels on which we have risk sharing within our fund. And I think it's back to what Mehdi was saying earlier about making sure that the risk lies with the party best placed to manage it, right? So on a financing agreement level between our fund and the ESCO, we would split the risk, so the technical risk stays with the ESCO. So if the technology fails, that's the ESCO's risk, and the credit risk or the default risk of the end customer, that lies with the fund. And back to what Pierre was saying, and this is where it kind of gets interesting, because then you have the blended finance element of it, which is this guarantee that we have from the EU. We're part of the EU's LIFE program, which basically provides a guarantee up to a certain level, that if the end customers, so the parties who benefit from the technology is the end customer, so the factory or whatever, if they default, then a part of that would be covered by this guarantee, this first loss guarantee. So, and that's also, you know, when we go to speak to the institutional investors, to the big insurers, for example, and pension funds, that's something that can be a real game changer, because, you know, they see these portfolios, which, you know, it's householders, it's SMEs, and they're like, okay, that's risky. But if you come to them and say, you know, we have this first loss guarantee, so you have this protection, that again can be a game changer. And I think, again, back to what Pierre said earlier, you know, there's only so much that subsidies can do, right? Like, you can give people subsidies, they can finance one project. You can
offer the market.
Yeah, exactly. But if you have your guarantee, you can mobilize this kind of private investment, and such that you can finance a lot more projects rather than just the one that you might have financed with your subsidy. So yeah, so I think that would be.
Okay, and for me it's also interesting by the experience I had on different markets, different countries, the quality of energy audits and the preparation of the project is not standardized. I personally saw energy audit where one whole floor was missing, or the name of other building was not exchanged. How can we de-risk, or how can we improve the situation? Pierre, maybe you or Benjamin, regarding technical assistance, capacity building also in the financial sector. I know that Evo, but...
Yeah, well, with Dilip, I think we work quite a lot on energy efficiency financing worldwide. I would say I was pretty distressed about all the work we've done because it's very, very difficult to convince a banker to change its way of working. So we spend a lot of time trying to convince banker. I think at the end of the day, the best way to do that is not necessarily to convince banker, but to create a separate energy efficiency bank. Actually, we're managing an energy efficiency fund in Bulgaria that is dedicated to do that. And within a month, we're able to finance any energy efficiency project going on out there because we are specialists in doing that. But we spent months, if not years, if not decades, to try to go to banks and convince them to do otherwise. Because as you mentioned, they work on an asset-based. That's the way they work. And we're talking about project finance on our side. And project finance, there is a unit of project finance in most banks. They work at 50 million and over. So when you talk about an energy efficiency project at $50,000, the guys at 50 million don't want to see you, and the guys below 50 million don't understand. And they will not change because that's the way they work. They make a good business, they make a good life, they don't have too much risk, and that's the way they work, period. So the alternative is a guarantee. And I think the guarantee, as you mentioned, is probably the key product that has to be out there. So convincing bank to try to change, I don't think we have the time, we have the strength, I'm too old to do that whatsoever, won't happen. I think there's different products that can be out there. A dedicated fund, dedicated to energy efficiency is probably good because that's all they do. And if they don't lend, then they're out of business. Guarantees should be there and more and more.
And we're talking about portfolio guarantees and first loss guarantees.
Exactly, because that's the way you diversify your risk. If you're financing one $70 million project, it's a lot more riskier than having 7 projects at $10 million or 700 projects at $10,000 or whatever. So diversifying is what Super ESCO are doing very, very well. They diversify the portfolio. So then the risk goes lower, but still the risk is out there. So that little guarantee that's coming for 2-3% on a portfolio basis makes a long way. So I think there's a lot more capacity within the market, within the EU, within the governments, wherever, within the World Bank to work on guarantees and to work on direct financing. Because direct financing, they channel through banks. And I'll give you an example outside of the EU and North America. We're currently working on credit lines in Ghana. Well, we have $60 million to lend for energy efficiency. Well, there's no ESCO over there, agree. But still, we're able to lend at pretty good conditions. It's not the end user who don't request it. It's the banks who always find a way not to lend. Too risky, too complicated, not standardized, I don't understand the technology, I don't understand the intermediary, what's the guarantee, and so on, and it never ends. So it took us like 4 years to actually disburse the damn thing, where it should have took like 2 years. Why? Because we spent so much time convincing the banks. If we had created an energy efficiency fund out there, probably all the money would have went out the window by 2 years because there's a demand out there. So whatever conditions. Ghana is a very different country as we are talking about EU and all that and the credit worthiness, right? But these banks are used to do that. That's the environment. So I think financing has to evolve quite a lot. I think the ESCO world has evolved quite a lot. It's a proof here that we have very good company, Green Yellow being one, being very, very innovative, and there are a bunch of others. Technically, ESCOs are making it. The banking sector is lagging behind, and I think that's where we have to work.
The identified challenge in expertise or in lack of performance data for newer or smaller ESCOs, we can mitigate very effectively with certification programs, which we already discussed in the previous panels. And because the time is so short, I will jump into the next section. Yes, sure.
Sorry,
Benjamin?
Svetlana, just one small comment from the ESCO perspective. I agree with what's been said, but the way I see us is, we sit with the money and the clients, essentially, right? the issue we have is if we make it too standardized and too simple, then the funding is happy with this, but the client is like, well, where's the value? You know, when this becomes too easy, they will learn it and they will do it on their own. They don't need an ESCO for that. But then when we tackle really complex, I don't know, industries, for instance, you know, the real life, right, where the 40 years ago, the manufacturing plant was like this, and today it is, you know, this is immensely complex. This is where they see the value. And if we start tackling things that are more like commodities, then there is no interest from the client for this. So, you know, I agree with what you're saying, but what I'm saying is there's a limit to how much we can standardize and simplify things. And that maybe is the one big issue that we can not completely solve.
So as much as possible, as less as needed.
If I may add something, I'm coming back to this famous contract which was built, which actually is applicable to various industries. And you need to distinguish two things. One is the technical thing, and then is the legal thing.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the basic risk? The basic risk for any investor is, will the client give me my money? So as long as you've got the same mechanic, and it doesn't matter, you go pull his ear, 1. You come with a big stick, 2. And the third time you take his equipment away, I'm just making a joke, is the mechanic of legal can be very simple. The same thing is true for the verification. You know, what I'm always surprised is that there seems to be such a big gray area on verification. Which part is so complicated?
Well, verification actually has some complexity in it. If you look at the IP MVP, already you have something like 4 different options. And then if you look at complex projects like full decarbonization of one site, it will involve many different assets, and each of them will come with their own small measure and verification. So, you know, teaching that to the client is already quite an investment, and then to the financing partner is sometimes almost impossible. So, I mean, what we do with Siemens is we come with a history of a performance, you know, and we tell them, look, you know, yeah, maybe the measure and verification was overly complex, but somehow we managed to sell it, and we managed to keep the agreement with the client, make them happy, and you know, have them pay until the end. For me, that's the way to simplify it for the financial partners. Otherwise, you go into details, forget about it. But clearly, the appendix for the measure and verification is 50 pages when the contract itself is 10 pages. So I follow you on the contract itself. For me, it's simplified enough so that financial companies can take it. Yeah. And one last thing on the off-balance approach. At Siemens, we actually sold a few of those contracts, and our auditors and the auditors from the clients, they were all pharmaceutical companies for some reason, agreed that it was actually off balance. So, you know, I don't know if we can say this can be fully generalized. You know, maybe we were lucky, but according to our auditors and the clients, this was fully IFRS 16 compliant. And
I have never come across an auditor who would be in love with Siemens or anybody else. This is not a love affair. Either it complies, IFRS 16 has got certain loops. If the contract jumps through the loops, it's off balance sheet. Otherwise, it's back on balance sheet. Finito la musica. And what we have done, and actually on the advice of BNP, we help the client. We go to the with the ESCO, we go to the client and say, this is how it is done.
We also had to explain it. Yeah.
And then suddenly, it helps the auditor because he's not used to this. Mm-hmm. The auditors don't see this kind of energy saving. That's not their average thing. All of them who gave us the accounting review were sitting there and scratching their head. But after they finished scratching their head, they said, yes, it works. And you are the confirmation of that.
Before we go to capitalization of ESCO project, I would like to ask Dilip to share his opinion how donors and development agencies contribute to the de-risking of energy performance contracts.
Well, one example is what Pierre already mentioned, the setting up of an energy efficiency fund, which is partly capitalized by donors and partly capitalized by the government. And that fund then provides the funding required for the ESCO projects. One of the more recent, more successful examples has been preparation of a partial risk guarantee program. It's worked very well in India, where the ESCOs were not really participating in too many projects. The World Bank set up a partial risk guarantee fund, and they have funded now in the last 3 or 4 years about 75 or 100 projects, most of them with ESCOs, and they go through various sectors, public as well as private sector. Simplest being street lighting, but the most complicated being the industrial. So that's another way of doing this. Then there are, of course, credit lines. EBRD has, of course, done a lot of these, where they have essentially provided IFI money to commercial banks and signed up commercial banks to provide that as an on-lending. The commercial banks usually put in their own funds into it. The donor money comes at a low interest rate, so that allows the interest rate to the recipient to be reduced from market-based interest rates. That creates another way of financing and helping to de-risk the financial
loans also with terms and conditions.
both the low interest and longer repayment period are both included in there. And there's more of these. All the IFIs have funded credit lines in many different countries. But again, the ESCO's ability to take care of this depends on all the other things we talked about. But these are instruments that have been proposed, that have been successful in at least coming up with some financing schemes that will de-risk the ESCOs.
Thank you, Dilip. So we will go now to how to capitalize the ESCO projects, starting with traditional debt, quasi-debt, quasi-equity and equity financing to alternative options of, for example, green bonds and forfeiting. Chap, can you share with us your insights on how to use green bonds in order to capitalize ESCO projects, and then I will turn to Luisa to tell us about the forfeiting.
Well, you've got two sorts of green bonds. One is the ante hoc, and the second one is the post hoc. So Siemens, not because you are here, but because you've got a decent balance sheet and people are willing to lend you money, can make a bond, which then will comply with the various criteria of having such a bond. And investors are happy to subscribe to it, particularly if there is a AAA name behind it. Clearly, that shifts the further you move down the credit quality. What is our core business is actually the securitization part. So what we believe is that every balance sheet is having an end, and that every time there is when the end of the balance sheet arrives, the banker says, or what I call the warehousing banker says, so what are we doing now? So everybody is scratching his head, and then we are very happy to buy receivables, repackage them into a capital market product, with that the project financer is deleveraged. Possibly he can have a yield pickup, because maybe he was able to sell the project at 8% yield, and he's selling us the project pool at 6% yield, so he's having a 2% which he's trousering for the tenor of the contract. We then package it, subject to the underlying contracts being done in such a way that they're ESG taxonomy compliant. Then there will be a green bond rating, which actually my colleague is in charge of. Alex is brilliant on that. and we sell it to investors who are looking for this kind of product. I mean, it's fairly straightforward. It's structuring a capital market product. Just in this case, that one needs to tick a few boxes of requirements so that it is green, and that process takes time. And if one, and I think that this is something which people need to be aware of, if they would like to issue a green bond, especially on the securitization front, later on, they better be prepared and have their ducks in a row before they want to sell the receivables. Otherwise, it's going to be extremely hard to make that into a green bond.
Benjamin, it is interesting to hear how Siemens as an ESCO makes a decision how to capitalize the ESCO project.
First of all, let's turn on the mic. First of all, I have to say within Siemens, we have an entity which is called Siemens Financial Services, which is very helpful in actually providing capital for our projects. So they would be our preferred partner when it comes to financing. I would say that to this date, with maybe the exception of the US, still most of our projects are CapEx funded by the final client. It's true that in front of us we have many industries, many manufacturing clients, and more, because they are also investing in decarbonization, also from an image point of view. In food and beverage, for instance, we recently started a program with Heineken. This is not confidential, but those kind of companies, they really want to take the hold of it. They make it strategic for themselves, right? So for these companies, in the end, financing might not be such a big issue.
And what about financing structures like SPVs, PPPs?
Yeah, so PPPs, SPVs, we have more experience with this in the US. I'll give you the feedback from the colleagues over there. PPPs, they were meant for really huge projects in the beginning, right? And they've been used with especially universities in the US, universities that were happy to find this kind of financing so that their own funds could be put into markets that brings higher yields, So for them it was good, like you handle the dormitories, the gym facilities and all that, and we, the university, will invest in other markets that bring better interest. Now the issue they've faced is, first of all, the size of it. It reserves it to certain type of customers, not so many of them. And the second issue is during the pandemic, all the dormitories were empty, but someone had still to pay for the rooms and all that, and they found themselves, those universities, in a dire situation. So right now, especially with the free money flowing from the federal government, this model is a bit on hold, I would say, at least from our point of view. SPVs, we have an issue with them. They look good on paper, but I guess it's the standardization complexity topic. From our point of view, they're a bit difficult to replicate so easily. So they're quite an important effort to set up. But when it comes to, grow them or replicate them, we are still struggling. I have to be honest, we use this maybe in a few percentages of the situation that we see, so it's not like we are really aiming to make this the base of our business. Maybe that's one of the issues. But so in the end, this is why when you mention super ESCOs, specialized funds, I really see the importance of this, because I would say Siemens is well positioned to handle those financial aspects, the size of Siemens, the financial service, but still we struggle, and it feels like it's a one-off type of approach. And if we could have partners that really deal with those aspects, that also brings the client toward this, it would be a win-win-win for everyone. I see it, from my experience.
strange why I mentioned I was at the beginning of my career also an ESCO, and it was Siemens. And my first energy performance contract was with duration of 20 years. And when we prepared the financial and the technical proposal to apply for this project, the financial question arose. So it was in a country which was not yet member in the EU, Maastricht criteria, and it was Siemens, which there was the rule we cannot take a financing for more than, I think at that time it was 15 months duration. So we were thinking how to finance this. It was like 15 million, 20 years ago. Yes, and then I remembered at the university, I heard about forfeiting. So we went to a bank. Coincidentally, this bank wanted to extend services in the same country, and we agreed on terms and conditions for forfeiting before we prepared our proposal. So it was like financing, but not on our books. It was like, I will sell you our future receivables. Now the times changed, obviously, and Siemens doesn't have such issue anymore, but we are going to forfeiting. And this was a nice bridge. How your Solus Capital is helping ESCOs.
So yeah, thanks, Svetlana. I mean, I suppose there's two methods we use, and one of them we would also use the kind of SPV model, but we also work with the sale of receivables, as Svetlana mentioned, which essentially means that the fund would purchase that revenue stream, or a percentage of it, which, yeah, I mean, it can be very attractive, obviously, for the ESCOs, and yeah, but we're tending to see that less, honestly, than the kind of SPV model.
But what I hear from your colleague is that when you buy receivables from an ESCO, you're not buying only one contract, but
No.
mandatory, you're buying the whole portfolio
Yeah.
of contract to diversify
Exactly, exactly, yeah. And the portfolio diversification is one of the key
And the
points for us.
sizes, are there, what is the range?
The range is, I mean, so typically in the entire portfolio, we look for a framework kind of 15 to 20 million, but the individual projects within that, they can be much smaller. And so you have the framework which you can draw down on. It could be anything, as I've said before, 10, 50,000 up to maybe 1.5, 2 million. So they really are small projects. I mean, they're not. It's not going to be the big projects that we were talking about before. But it's key. This kind of diversification and the pooling of the projects is key for this as well.
Maybe I can add something on the forfeiting. The banks look at it as a stable receivable, but they still have to be backed by the ESCO guarantee, right?
Yeah.
Because obviously, if not, it becomes a straight loan. And obviously, we're talking about Siemens quite a lot, and it's a very good company, and they're able to provide quite a lot of added value. But you have to remember that most ESCOs are not Siemens. Many of them are smaller. And then we get into the guarantee issue, because all these ESCOs rely on their capacity to be paid out of savings or guarantee the savings. And many of those ESCOs, the late Shirley Henson, that was really the grandmother of ESCOs, called them wishcos, saying that they want to become an ESCO. They're startups, they're small firms or medium firms, but they cannot back it up. So the guarantee is not existing. So forfeiting has to come with ESCOs that are able to provide the guarantee. And Moldova being an example, or Kenya, or whatever, these ESCOs that are startup, it's quite difficult for them to sustain quite a lot of guarantees. So we talk about guarantees at the financial level. At some point, the Siemens don't need the outside technical guarantee because they're strong enough, or the others. But there are many of these ESCOs that we need to build a sustainable business that do not have that technical guarantee, and that needs to be done. So there are products, but they're still not that mature. the insurance products for efficiency is still not out there. They're expensive. They're a little bit complex, and maybe not they not adapt to a 10 to 15 years type of project, especially at $50,000.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the other things that helps to de-risk with these long-term projects, I mean, it is, 15, 20 years is obviously a long time, and you can expect, will that person still be there in 15 years? Chances are not, but often the technology and the revenues are coming from stuff that's operationally required. It's lighting, it's heating, it's stuff. Whoever's going to move in, they'll need to take that on, which really also helps to de-risk in the long term. And actually, our investors, one of the things they like is this kind of long-term, stable income that they get from these kind of contracts that we get from there. So.
And I also think that this is one of the important roles of a publicly owned super ESCO, to create the market and to facilitate the establishment of new ESCOs on the market, and the existing ESCOs to help them, to support them grow and become more stable and potent. We are running over the time, and the last topic, which is the blended financing, is my favorite. So we were talking about how to capitalize ESCO project with public money or with private resources. So maybe collaboration between these two sectors, public and private resources, could improve a lot the situation. So with whom to start on blending? No, okay.
Don't start on blending with me, but I just wanted to add something to the earlier subject. The capital markets are extremely good in pricing risk. And these are all grown-up people who will price even a younger company at a certain price. So I think that what we are underestimating is if we go to capital market participants, they will say, this risk is worth 10% to me. Many, many years ago, the whole takeover wave in America was financed by Drexel Burnham Lambert, and they did all the big takeovers. They financed everything. Was it cheap? No, it came at 18, 20%. But somebody said, I'm willing to pay, to give you money if you pay me 20%. So I think the risk and the pricing of the risk, that's where the capital markets are extremely efficient.
But if the risk is priced too high, then the attractiveness or the viability of the
then maybe
project.
I'm hearing a lot of ESCOs who are trying to have very, very high profit margins. So maybe they will need to take a smaller size.
But this is the same. The ESCOs have the technical risks, which have also price. So pricing the risks.
So
one way or the other.
One way or another, capital markets are very, very efficient. Why is the Austrian debt 0.3 basis points above German debt? 3 basis points. Did somebody dream that up? He woke up in the morning and it said 3 basis points. And Greek is 45 basis points. Italian is 18 basis points. So who comes up with that? The market. And they are saying, I'm willing to buy that at this premium to risk-free rate of return, which is accepted the German Bund.
Okay, blending. How can we blend smart, and why? Why we're talking about blending? So with some exemptions, I personally don't know a country that can implement all these projects and improve all this energy demand. We have only 5 minutes with only public money. So there is a need to leverage on commercial financing. How to leverage on commercial financing when we make the investments more attractive, de-risk them, etc. Dilip, can you share your experience with
A little
blending
bit.
mechanisms?
There's not been too many examples of blending financing for the ESCO markets.
I'm thinking about, for example, grants, blended or
Oh,
mixed,
okay,
combined
different
with
things.
DPCs.
Okay, so yes, we've been working right now in several European countries where they've been in the past financing with 100% grants. And we all know it's not sustainable. EU knows it's not sustainable, but they don't know how to do it differently. So we've been developing financing instruments now, which will essentially, as the grants are reduced, encourage private financing to come in. Grants will not go down to zero. We're looking at renovation of buildings where the total investment requirements are pretty high and the paybacks are in the range of 10 to 15 years. So the grants have essentially done that. But if you start reducing the grants, you still need some portion of the grants. And the question is, what is the best proportion of grants versus financing, and what types of financing instruments? So now we're talking about a potentially a combination of a loan, a guarantee facility, and a grant, and basically developing what types of proportions will be required. And we've come up with some, specifically in Bulgaria and Croatia, we've come up with a combination of these programs where the grant portion gets reduced from the past 100% down to 80 and then maybe 50.
And
or
this
even
for the
30.
residential.
This is for multifamily residential
Yeah.
buildings. Yeah. But then the question comes up, where is this non-grant portion coming from? And one of the biggest challenges is how to get ESCOs in that market. And there are possibilities in the ESCO industries, which are still very nascent in these countries, are saying that given the chance, we can have a role to play here. Given that the commercial banks can then provide the financing, a risk-sharing or risk guarantee facility set up with a first loss as well as a very pursue guarantee, and then ESCOs are willing to take on the technical risk to do this. So that's the blending we have proposed. I'll keep it short because we have very little time here.
I'm also thinking about using grants and public money for subsidies of interest rate, concessional loans, technical assistance, capacity building even. Would somebody like to add to blending? And then I will give the floor to the audience because maybe there are some questions if Federico gives us some few minutes.
Just kind of adding on the grant topic. One thing to be careful of is to make sure that governments are they're clear about what they're doing and that they implement it in a reasonable time frame, because otherwise it can put a stop to it. Like we have the experience with some ESCOs. I think in Germany there was new heat pump subsidies being introduced, and it took a long time for them to be implemented. And so all the projects are on hold until we find out what happens with the subsidies, right? And that's not helping anybody, right? Like just nothing's happening anymore. So I think that's the other thing. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about how important it is and how important regulation is, but it's also, and I think everyone in the room probably recognizes as well, it needs to be faster, right? Like it's great talking about stuff and having the regulation, having the subsidies, but it needs to actually be faster.
Because what Lisa is referring to is a big issue. We are working a lot with the Heat Pump Association, in Brussels, and actually the members who have invested now a fortune in new manufacturing plants, they are standing there and turnover is going down like this, just because of the subject of grants. And I've seen it in Poland, in Katowice. They wanted to change buses. Government was paying 85%, and they're still waiting for the 15% to arrive. Haven't come. So, the mayor is sitting there and waiting for the grant to arrive. Well, ain't coming. And with that, the whole decarbonization is stopped, and it's a big issue.
Then I will end the blending financing with mentioning the Bulgarian Energy Efficiency Fund, which achieved with combining or using the public money for partial guarantees, for guarantee mechanism. They achieved almost 5% leverage coefficient to rise commercial banking. So,
Yeah.
complimented.
Well, I think it was a great part of the design, which we did not do. So I would give I would essentially give all the credits to the designer, but essentially that fund was quite a lot of success actually, because it was able to provide pretty low costing, pretty efficient way of doing that, and very, very flexible way. So they can do financing, co-financing, guarantee, insurances, whatever, as long as the market needs it to move along projects. So I think it's a good reference indeed.
So now I will open the floor if there are questions. You can directly address the panelists. South Africa.
Yeah, it's Devon Pillay from South Africa. I talk in a different hat now as an ESCO, and just some of the challenges I experienced going to financial arms. I mean, DFIs and commercial banks have promised us they're really focused on energy efficiency, but they're very, very selective on what they choose. Energy efficiency, when you look at energy performance contracting models, comes with some of its dynamics, because to establish a baseline comes with a lot of variation as compared to generating electricity where you just measure the output. So it's easy for them to digest that risk. We had time in, time out that they come into conferences, the DFIs and commercial banks, and say, hold on, they are all for the green economy. But when you get down to the projects and you look at the risk mitigation, they don't want your mother's money, they want your mother-in-law's money as well. You know, that's from a security risk. We hear all the good solutions from you, you know, and I just wonder why. I mean, why is it not filtering to make energy efficiency scalable as it should and as it should be deserved? Are we going to sit here in 5 years' time say the same thing? The concern is, how do we make this impactful? How do we get down all these clever ideas that you have? Some of it, and I said, why? Why aren't people listening to it? Why aren't we seeing it at the ground? I see it, you know, where the pledges are made, but it's not happening at the ground level. So I just feel to the committee here, I just feel the pain. I feel for the ESCOs that I want to stimulate the economy, not only in South Africa, but I'd like to see it for the whole world. I mean, we only have one planet, right? So that is key, a concern. We're not seeing it materially on the ground.
Thank you.
If I may, I hear you. I hear you very well. The issue is that there is always a variance in credit quality. And that's what we are all talking about. So not everybody will have the same opportunity. And I fully agree with you. We only have got one planet. And having as many children as I have, I see them 100 years down, because I see my great-grandchildren. And I wonder what is going to be happening, like is happening in India at the moment. You can't walk in Delhi, it's 50 degrees. People are boiling. So we need to have new business models. Pierre's idea of an ESCO bank, and maybe the bank should be a different structure, not make a profit, and distribute to other people, to those who cannot afford it. Maybe we need to, the whole energy transition in my book needs to come up with new ideas, completely new ones. So maybe the risk assessment needs to be a different one. Maybe the dividend policies need to be scrapped, because there's no point in making a dividend if the world goes to hell in a handbasket. So I fully agree with you, but I think it's a discussion which we need to have amongst all of us and come up with clever business models, because there is plenty of money there. Even there is a big handover of wealth between elder people and the younger generation. A lot of people in Germany are inheriting now a few 100 million. They would be happy to put 1 million, 2 million, 10 million into something which says, we will save the world.
But there is another example. During the COVID times in Portugal, they created a crowdfunding for energy performance contracts, which started really small, I think 20, 30,000 euro, and now they have over 20 million or something.
Yeah.
So,
Sure. Just to latch on to the comments made, sorry, I fully respect that. You know, I think, you know, you spoke about there's no lack of funding, just getting the projects, and so I respect that. How about some pilots? You know, we can put it to test. I think around here, a lot of projects can be emanated and look at the criteria, and let's call it a pilot. And then we put it to the test. What is it? And you know, that's the best way to do it. Otherwise, we'll be, you know, I just don't want to see in 5 years' time we're talking about the same things, same ideas. So how do we get this thing together? If it's not lack of funding, what is it? I mean, we spoke about how you can overcome some of the challenges. So I think pilots would be a great thing to get it going and saying, yeah, here's a success story. Now let's take it to scale.
I'm going to make an allusion to driving a car. When you start driving a car, and investors are now the drivers of the car, we need to teach them with easy models. And it works. We've heard it. PV and wind parks are getting financed. Everybody is falling over each other. Why? They are big. There are power purchase agreements behind it, and investors got used to it. And the last one, the investor got used to it, is what we need to get to. So investors need to be comfortable with energy performance, how it works, and then we can take them to drive on an ice course, which I would say where credit risk is more of a problem. Doing energy efficiency in the States and in Europe should be fairly straightforward, and even here it doesn't work. Taking people to other parts outside of what we call major currencies, because going to South Africa is a currency risk. Who is going to be the investor? There are pools of capital there. I've been talking over lunch with somebody which unfortunately we didn't have the time to speak about, Sharia compliant finance. What we are trying to do here is the ideal model for Sharia compliant finance. When we buy our petrol, we are sending euros down to Arab countries. You know what they want to do? They want to invest them in euros again. But they need to have a product which is compliant with what they need. Where is Sharia compliant finance in competition with what we are trying to do? We are sharing the savings. It is not to do with drugs. It has got nothing to do with alcohol. I spoke to a few scholars. It's a pocket of money which we haven't even attacked yet. So there are solutions, but we need to find the time. And unfortunately, I think Pierre said, there are too few hands in this industry to actually do everything what's coming on the table. I need to refuse business because I can't handle it.
So I have a very, very simple idea. Why don't we buy negawatts like we buy megawatts? Okay, we developed some of these programs a long time ago in the US where you're being paid for saving energy, for saving capacity, for saving kilowatt hours as well as kilowatts. We designed a program in South Africa, which ESCOM paid ESCOs for demonstrated savings. If you saved X kilowatt hours during certain periods, we will pay you so much per kilowatt hour. Now, this is why it works with solar and wind and some of these renewables, because you have a PPA. But this is a concept for a PPA for negative energy, for a negawatt. It needs to be developed further, and we need to get people to convince. But we don't have time today to go through it. Maybe another session in the next conference.
One last question. And we're really out of time.
Okay, I'll try to keep very brief. My name is Onur. I'm from Turkey, Izmir. I really like how you mention younger generations, because people who are really facing the climate crisis and risks of climate crisis has, I think, a lot more to say, actually. But they are not included in the financial system globally. I mean, their participation is very limited. So what is your opinion about, let's say, using crypto technologies and tokenizing these green bonds, for example, by the end of, I think, last year, Societe Generale issued tokens of 10 million euros or something like that, green bonds. They are programmable, they are more accessible, they are more transparent. I would like to have your opinion on this. Thank you.
I think the question is...
Actually, for anyone who wants to, I mean, I really wonder if anyone has ideas.
Well, we have just been asked to come back to your thing to address for younger generation green bonds via crowdfunding. The EU Commission has just asked us to put together an application for a grant. I've been trying to talk to the gentleman sitting straight in front of me, who is now starting to smile. He didn't understand yet that he has already committed to it, but he doesn't understand it. No, so yes, we want to give the younger generation the ability to live with what actually is their challenge. I will be gone in a few years. My sons will be hopefully here for a few more years. It's them, it's my grandchildren who will be sitting in a place which is simply too hot for health. My father died in the summer when it was 40 degrees outside of Vienna. The old man was in good shape. He was old, but he was in good shape. It's the heat which killed him. So there are other parts of the world which are even hotter than... We're sitting here in Paris and it's mid-May and it's 13 degrees, and we think that global warming is not happening. It's not true. It is out there. So it's all of our efforts here. And yes, we are producing, and the EU actually said, please put this in, and we make sure if you bring the right people, and I said that he will be part of it. I'm joking. That we can give to the younger generation capital market products which they can buy in small pieces.
Thank you, all the panelists, for your active participation, and thank you for joining us today. And I'm closing the panel now. The panel is closed.